Hello future planners, welcome to my movie. In the before times, I would have students meet me at the UDC and we'd go for a walking tour of downtown. In just a few blocks, you can see examples of virtually all of the urban planning issues that we talk about in class. It was the highlight of the semester for me. Because we can't do that now, I've made this movie. I hope to demonstrate the class topics that you could find downtown and maybe sneak in some interesting history of the area. Let's go! This area was home to many Native American settlements until the end of the Revolutionary War. The indigenous people were brutally driven out by Continental Army troops under the command of General Clinton and General Sullivan. Artifacts from those native settlements are still found during archaeological digs in the area. William Bingham bought 10,000 acres in 1786 and his land agent Joshua Whitney Jr. helped build the first roads and establish a settlement here. The Erie Canal opened in 1825, connecting New York City with the Great Lakes, bypassing Binghamton. To correct this, the 97-mile Shenango Canal was completed in 1837, connecting Binghamton to the Erie Canal in Utica. State Street, have you heard of it? Was the location of the Shenango Canal in downtown. If you head out of town to Shenango Valley State Park, just north of the city, you can walk on the original towpath for the Shenango Canal. My dog thinks it's a really great park. As railroads replaced canals, the Erie Railroad came in 1849 and connected Binghamton with New York City. These transportation milestones fueled rapid industrialization and urbanization of Binghamton, as it did much of the rest of the country. From 1830 to 1890, Binghamton's population nearly doubled every decade. This influx of population would lead to early skyscrapers coming to downtown. We're lucky that we still have many of the buildings from this period. As Binghamton grew, the buildings often had mixed uses with shops on the first floor and residences on upper floors. This was a great thing because it meant that the city was active at night and on the weekends. After World War II, residents moved out and only came downtown to work. The result was a city that was dead in the evenings and on the weekends. Another great thing about the buildings from the 1800s and early 1900s is that they engage the pedestrian. There are shop fronts to view as you walk by. These buildings are built at a human scale, and as a pedestrian, you don't feel overwhelmed. And they maintain the street wall. The street wall is the idea that all of the buildings line up the front lot line and form a sort of outdoor room. Later on, we'll see that accommodating the automobile sometimes meant breaking the street wall and putting cars out front in a suburban style of design not appropriate to the urban core. Buildings like these from the early period of urbanization would later inspire new urbanists like Andrews Duaney. Many communities have turned to form-based codes to replace their traditional zoning ordinances to try and recapture the feel of streets from this period. Form-based code often requires a build-to line to maintain the street wall and that the buildings engage pedestrians on the first floor with shop fronts and other types of visual interest. Before we move on, I want to show you a creative way to reuse these old buildings. This is just a bit of the Luma Projection Arts Festival that is held in downtown Binghamton each year.
Welcome. Mount Luma.
As people moved into cities, engineers figured out how to make buildings taller to maximize their commercial potential. In the early days of urbanization, you would have found 3 to 5-story buildings downtown. Any taller than that, and masonry walls would be too thick to be practical. But the invention of steel frame construction meant that the skeleton of the building carried the load, and the stone, brick, and glass exterior was just a thin skin. This engineering innovation and the invention of the elevator made tall buildings practical. In downtown Binghamton, we have 2 really special early skyscrapers, the Security Mutual Building and the Press Building. Both completed in 1904, both designed by Truman Lacey and Sons, and both in the Beaux-Arts style, the same style that you would have seen at the Columbian Exposition. It was a style of architecture that looked to the past for inspiration. When you look at these early skyscrapers, they look like the smaller buildings downtown, just big. It would be Louis Sullivan who pointed the way to the future by designing buildings that looked like they soared to the sky. The Press Building was originally home to the Binghamton Press newspaper, but more recently it was converted to student housing as the Printing House. Until the construction of the State Office Building 70 years later, the Press Building was the tallest building in Binghamton. The Security Mutual Building has been the headquarters of Security Mutual Insurance for over 115 years. When built, Security Mutual was in a horseshoe shape, which enabled interior offices to have access to light and air. Zoning wouldn't be invented for another 12 years, and tall buildings alarmed some neighboring property owners who feared their smaller buildings would be cut off from light and air. With the invention of modern heating and ventilating systems, Security Mutual filled the center of their building with more office space. A final note. If you ever see bits of deceased pigeons scattered on the sidewalk, blame one of these guys. We have several nesting pairs of peregrine falcons in the upper floors of the Press Building and Security Mutual Building. They can pull 10 Gs and reach speeds of 200 miles an hour in a dive, making them the fastest animals in the world. By chance, I caught a bit of a falcon screech when I was filming downtown. As soldiers returned from World War II, the country was faced with a housing crisis. Cities were filled with cramped, dilapidated tenement housing. The response by the federal government to this very real need was the Housing Act of 1949, which contained the disastrous urban renewal program. Binghamton, like most other cities in the U.S., participated in urban renewal. The City of Binghamton designated urban renewal areas and developed a massive, multi-year redevelopment program which was, according to then Mayor John Burns, aimed at changing the face of the business district and breathing new life into the area. The properties in the urban renewal areas were designated as blighted, then acquired by the City of Binghamton, some through eminent domain, and demolished to make way for large-scale development. These urban renewal era projects still exist today. The Broome County Veterans Memorial Arena was one. Completed in 1973, this facility was built to host concerts, professional hockey, events, and trade shows. I saw my first concert here, ZZ Top. As you stand on the sidewalk near the arena, ask yourself, where is the entrance? It's hard to find because the arena was not designed for pedestrians at the street level. That's because under Binghamton's urban renewal plan, pedestrian walkways were constructed at the second floor level of the buildings. These skywalks originally connected the arena, 20 Hawley Street, Government Plaza, the Broome County Courthouse, and more. The idea was to remake the dense urban streets for the automobile and have pedestrians use the walkways. Most of these pedestrian skyways have now been demolished, but a couple remain. I got trapped in one. Ask me about it in class. Completed in 1972, 20 Hawley Street is another urban renewal project. It was built as the headquarters for Marine Midland Bank. What building from the 10 buildings that changed America is 20 Hawley Street based on? Notice how at the street level, the walls of 20 Hawley Street are blank. They don't engage the pedestrian at all. The focus during urban renewal was on the automobile. The second floor of 20 Hawley Street was a plaza meant for the community, with a major sculpture created by SUNY Albany graduate Arline Peartree. The building is designed to be an arch and was intended to be a gateway to the arena next door. The building has been converted to student housing, one of the many student housing projects that have come downtown since the opening of the UDC. It appears that we now have a glut of student housing. Please don't include student housing in your group projects. There is not sufficient market demand for more student units in Binghamton. The Holiday Inn on Hawley Street was another urban renewal project. Built in 1969, the hotel was constructed with a large surface parking lot, an auto-oriented design style that is more appropriate to the suburbs than it is to the city. The most ambitious urban renewal era project in Binghamton was Governmental Plaza on Hawley Street. Home to Binghamton City Hall, the Broome County Office Building, and the Regional State Office Building, Governmental Plaza occupies almost the entire city block. The complex has 2 levels of underground parking, a public plaza, and public art from internationally recognized artists Louise Nevelson, Arnaldo Pomodoro, and Masao Kinoshita. Sadly, the complex has been allowed to deteriorate and is in a sad state now. But spoiler alert, Broome County planners are working to revitalize Governmental Plaza. In addition to urban renewal, the Housing Act of 1949 contained a major federal investment in public housing, and we saw our share of it here. In Binghamton, 2 10-story public housing towers were built, along with 2-story garden apartments, which are much more appropriate to the density of development here. According to researchers at the University of Richmond, 667 families were displaced by urban renewal projects in Binghamton, 3% of which were families of color. Roughly the same number of public housing units were ultimately constructed here. Downtown Binghamton was built with a well-integrated street network. That network, plus the mixed-use buildings found in the early period of urbanization, meant this was a very walkable community. And it had to be. In the early days of urbanization, most people walked to work. So, if they worked in downtown Binghamton, they probably lived somewhere in the city and not in a distant suburb. This began to change in 1868 when Binghamton got its first streetcars. The first transit system was wagons pulled along rails by teams of horses. In 1887, the city upgraded to electric trolleys, the first in New York. They switched over to buses in 1932, but the trolley tracks are still under the pavement in many parts of the city. This early mass transit pushed residential development out of the urban core. But it was really the automobile, combined with federal housing policies, that greatly accelerated the suburbanization trend after World War II. As the car became the dominant form of transportation in the U.S., cities were changed to accommodate them. In Binghamton, the Federal Highway Act brought interstates to the area and the construction of the Brandywine Highway and North Shore Drive through the heart of the city. This made it easy to travel downtown by car, but it cut the community off from the waterfront along the Susquehanna River. The automobile had other major impacts on the physical form of downtown Binghamton. One was the construction of an overabundance of surface parking lots and private parking facilities. Surface parking lots pay little in taxes, they are a hole in the street wall, they do not engage pedestrians, they trap heat making cities hotter, and lead to more stormwater runoff, which increases flooding. Today we have 48 acres of surface parking in downtown Binghamton. While we need parking, downtown real estate is too precious to be devoted to surface parking. How can we do parking better? The City of Binghamton and BMTS, the transportation planners for this area, collaborated on a parking study for downtown. Here are just some of their recommendations. On-street parking is the most popular, so look for streets where you can fit in a few more spots. And charge more for on-street parking in the popular areas to encourage people to walk a few blocks to find cheaper spots. People don't like parking ramps. They don't feel safe and the lighting is poor. As a result, there are a lot of unused parking in the ramps. So redo the ramps to make them more inviting. Finally, encourage shared parking by allowing businesses to use shared lots to meet parking requirements. Here are examples of private lots that I found empty or underutilized. The other major impact of cars in the form of the city was how the geometry of streets was changed to favor the automobile. The result was a street system that supports the car at the expense of bikes and pedestrians. But we're learning how to design complete streets. With the complete streets approach, roads are designed and maintained to enable safe travel for users of all ages, abilities, and modes of transportation. That means pedestrians, bicyclists, cars, and buses all get equal treatment. State Street was recently redone to reflect this new design philosophy. During the urban renewal period, State Street was built to allow for fast travel by cars. These gentle corners were designed to allow cars to zoom through faster than Harvey cashing a housing deposit check. That's tough on pedestrians. But recently the street was narrowed, which will slow traffic. The corners were made tighter, and a center pedestrian refuge was added so that you can stop a second before you have to cross the second half of the street. All of these changes make a safer environment for pedestrians and a more attractive entrance to downtown. Another method of achieving complete streets that you can see downtown is the roundabout. Before the roundabout was installed on Court Street, the intersection was awkward and had lots of minor accidents. The roundabout allows for smooth flow of traffic. Vehicles don't have to stop at red lights, and pedestrians get safe crossings away from the intersection. Here's a fun fact. Roundabouts cut down on greenhouse gas emissions because cars and trucks don't have to stop and idle at red lights. Expect to see more roundabouts. One is being considered for Grand Boulevard on the west side. This is a sneak peek of a possible design. But there's a lot more to do. Here's an example of a poor attempt at complete street design. This is Hawley Street, and it was recently redone to this configuration. It has a sidewalk, bike lanes, back and parking, and 2 vehicle travel lanes. What did the designers get wrong on this project? This is what happens when traffic engineers see bike lanes as merely something to cross off on their to-do list. To achieve complete streets, we need more than an empty policy, we need a real commitment at all levels of government. Nearly every mechanism of economic development has been tried in downtown Binghamton, with varying degrees of success. These include sales and promotion, revolving loan funds, pilots, and business incubators. Have you been to Restaurant Week? Then you've participated in one of the city's most successful promotional efforts. How about First Friday? This grassroots event mixes art and nightlife on the first Friday of every month, and it's another successful promotional effort in downtown Binghamton. The Binghamton Local Development Corporation, a nonprofit established and managed by the City of Binghamton, makes low-interest loans to local businesses and startups. Their revolving loan fund was capitalized by federal grant dollars and now sustains itself from the interest on loan repayments. The agency, a regional economic development organization, also provides low-interest loans from a revolving loan fund in downtown Binghamton. The agency has another important economic development tool at their disposal, the Payment in Lieu of Taxes, or PILOT. Through this mechanism, developers can guarantee their property taxes at a fixed, low rate for a set period of time, usually 10 years, to get their project up off the ground. It's been used for these projects in downtown Binghamton. But the thing I really want to talk about are business incubators. The university runs the Kaufman Southern Tier Incubator, and I spoke to its Director of Operations, Laura Holmes.
Well, the overarching mission of the incubator is definitely economic development. We want to build a community that has jobs to offer the people that live here and the people that are graduating from the university and the community college. My role is Director of Operations, so it's my job to make sure our tenants are happy. I do a little bit of mentoring, but we also have individual mentors depending on the program that they're in. And I have a staff of about 6 people. So I oversee marketing, I oversee facilities, oversee events, all that kind of stuff. So we have a lot of different programs. We have individual mentoring, which every company that is a tenant here has to participate in. It's part of what they agree to. And then we have programs. We have the accelerator program, which you don't have to be a tenant for, and you can just come in with any idea in the back of your head that maybe you haven't developed or don't know how to start, and you can go through a 12-week program that's no cost, and at the end you come out knowing whether or not you have a good idea, whether or not there's a market for it. We also have the National Science Foundation I-Corps program, which is about customer discovery, which is not finding customers, it's actually finding out what your customers want before you build a product. So very important for any kind of STEM or research or something where you might spend years and hundreds or millions of dollars developing something that there's no market for. We have the Clean Energy Program, which is probably one of our biggest programs. More than half of our companies are in the clean tech space now. And they vary from everything from solar to grid management to greens to anything that would help the climate and reduce carbon output. So they received reduced rent compared to a regular office space. That's the first thing. It's subsidized rent based on an endowment that we received from the very generous donation of the Kaufman family. And they receive the mentoring. They receive, things like parking, Wi-Fi, copier, printer, free coffee. All that can add up when you're renting your own individual office space. So as well as the physical amenities, though, the most important thing is the environment where you're in a building with other entrepreneurs. We've had a lot of cross collaborations where companies have different products and then find out they have a third market if they combine their products. So it's really about the environment, the mentoring, and the camaraderie. Facility is beautiful. It's 35,000 square foot. We have a lot of co-working space in addition to our 3 types of office space, I'll call it. We have a regular administrative office. We have what we call a dry lab, which is just a large empty space where a company might be able to put 4 or 5 people in there instead of renting 4 or 5 offices. Some companies are actually building product in that space. We have the wet labs, which have full fume hoods. They're geared for any type of chemical use, 24/7 air turnaround in those labs. And then we have our co-working space, which is great for anybody in the community that just wants a different place to come. It doesn't have to be a startup, and they can utilize, a different space other than maybe their home office. Well, we are up to 15 graduates in 3.5 years. We have, I believe, about 58 companies now in our mentorship programs. About half of those are in the clean tech space. So some of these technologies will take years to come to market or to grow a lot of jobs because of the complexity of the technology. We have a medical technology here. But our more recent successes, I would say, since some of those are more longer term, are graduating small businesses into the community. They're able to hire a handful of people. The engagement that we give students and the opportunity to work with startups and internships has been very beneficial to a lot of our students, as well as just the student entrepreneurship programs that we offer as well. Actually, Key Branding Labs is a great one. They were our first graduate. Adam Sable is an alumni of Binghamton University. He didn't work with our office when he was on campus, but shortly thereafter. And they are now a company of 3 people, but more importantly is the progression of the company, and they will be hiring again in the near future. They started out doing social media for some local restaurants, and now they are a full-blown marketing agency. They have customers in Canada, they have customers in Chicago, they have customers in Pennsylvania, and they're able to operate that all right here out of Binghamton, New York, using the tools that they learned while they were here at the Kaufman. Probably the most important lesson, I think, for us is as we take applications for companies to come into the incubator, instead of looking at necessarily what the perfect technology is or what the perfect business type is, it's how mentorable the person is. So if an entrepreneur comes in and they already know everything there is to know and they're not open to learning the skills that we have to offer, then we know they're not a good fit for us. And The soft people skills are sometimes the hardest lessons to learn, but that's probably the most important factor now when we decide whether or not to accept a company in our program. I guess one obstacle is a misperception that we are funded by Binghamton University. We are not. We are a separate nonprofit entity. The university's contribution is some of the staff members that work here and put on the programming. Otherwise, there are no tuition dollars used for this facility. I think that's important for the community to know. I always encourage our students and their parents to know that as well. Not enough people realize that we're sitting in the heart of downtown Binghamton and what we're all about. So come check us out, thekaufman.com.
Historic preservation is the practice of maintaining and preserving those buildings, structures, and lands which hold a special level of significance in the history of the community. The first historic preservation law in the country was New York City's Local Landmarks Law of 1965. Passed in response to the demolition of Penn Station during urban renewal, this law became the template for similar historic preservation ordinances across the country, including the one in Binghamton. Under local historic preservation law, some buildings are, on their own, individually significant. Typically, we think of these buildings as having a high degree of architectural value. Others may have an association with important events or individuals in history, or there may be important archaeological artifacts on the site. Individually significant buildings may be listed on the State and National Register of Historic Places. Here are some individually significant buildings in downtown Binghamton that are on the State and National Register of Historic Places. What building from the 10 buildings that changed America is the Broome County Courthouse based on? Here's a hint: it has columns and a pediment like a Greek temple. This is Binghamton's former City Hall, built in the Beaux-Arts style similar to what you would have seen at the Columbian Exposition of 1893. Here's another building inspired by one of the 10 buildings that changed America. Can you guess which one? Some clues are the heavy, rustic stone and the wide round arch over the front door. Sadly, this building is severely deteriorated. I hope that we don't lose it. A historic district is a collection of buildings which are not individually significant, but taken as a whole represent an important part of a community's history. Here in downtown, we have the Court Street Historic District. Within a historic district, you have contributing buildings that were built during a time period that the district is trying to preserve. Other buildings in a district are non-contributing. That means that either they were not constructed during the period that the historic district is preserving, or they have been so completely altered from their original appearance that they no longer further the goals of the district. Sometimes these non-contributing buildings hide a historic past under a false facade. This is what Boscov's looked like when it was built, and that building is still there under a thin brick facade. This building at 59 Court Street is another historic building hiding under a modern false facade. How do we keep from losing these historic jewels? Here's one way. This is the former Broome County Public Library. Built in 1903, the library was a gift from Andrew Carnegie to the community. When the county outgrew the library, they sold this historic building to a private investor. That investor did not redevelop the building as he promised and did not put money into upkeep of the former library. The historic building declined for many years. Eventually, the Broome County Industrial Development Agency used eminent domain to force the sale of this historic building back to the community before we lost it forever. SUNY Broome then used historic preservation tax credits, various grants, and county funds to rehabilitate the deteriorated former library into a new center for culinary arts. This area has a long history of flooding. Since 1913, the Susquehanna River has left its banks 100 times. In 1935, a terrible flood destroyed hundreds of homes in this area and across New York. It did nearly $5 billion in damages in today's dollars. Tragically, that flood left 43 people dead. In response, the federal government built a massive flood control dam in Whitney Point and constructed 18 miles of flood walls and levees in the area. Broome County built numerous smaller flood control structures, many of which are also recreational areas. This network of hard infrastructure largely worked for many decades. In 1972, Hurricane Agnes devastated communities throughout the southern tier of New York and the Susquehanna Valley in Pennsylvania. At the time, this was the worst natural disaster in U.S. history and was the highest recorded flood in Broome County. But the floodwalls and levees protected downtown Binghamton from major damage in 1972. Hurricane Agnes was the record flood for over 30 years. Then in June of 2006, a major storm dumped 7 inches of rain on the area, causing widespread flooding which overtopped floodwalls and levees in some places. 3,000 residents had to be evacuated and 300 were airlifted from homes in nearby Conklin. The Binghamton University Event Center was converted to an emergency shelter. Luckily, downtown was largely spared by this new record flood in 2006. This flood record only stood for 5 years. In 2011, Tropical Storm Lee brought 12 inches of rain to the area. This time the floodwalls were not high enough to protect downtown. Across the area, hundreds of homes were damaged or destroyed. The University Downtown Center was swamped during this event. The UDC was opened in 2007. At the time, the flood maps, which dated from the 1980s, showed that the flood walls were high enough to protect the facility. But consistent with global warming predictions, we've been experiencing heavier rainfalls, and our flood walls and levees are no longer protective of the urban area. This is the top of the floodwall behind the UDC. To give you a sense of how high the floodwaters were in 2011, this is the distance between the river on a typical day and the top of the floodwall. That's 18 feet. When the university repaired the flood damage at the UDC, they moved the heating and cooling equipment to a higher location. If the flood walls are overtopped again, this will make the UDC easier to reoccupy. Hard infrastructure like flood walls and levees designed for the floods of 100 years ago are no longer enough for current climate conditions, but we have new tools for mitigating flood risk. When we build communities with nothing but pavement and buildings, rainwater is funneled quickly and unfiltered to streams and rivers rather than soak into the ground as it should. Stormwater runoff is a major cause of water pollution in urban areas because it carries trash, bacteria, heavy metals, and other pollutants from the urban landscape. And surging stormwater flows resulting from heavy rains can cause erosion and flooding in urban streams, damaging habitat, property, and infrastructure. But we've learned how to better deal with stormwater. By following the model of natural systems, letting the water spread out, slow down, and soak in, we can reduce flooding and improve water quality. Green infrastructure uses landscaping, green roofs, permeable pavement, and stormwater harvest and reuse systems to store, infiltrate, and evaporate stormwater. This reduces peak flows and improves water quality. And there are examples of green infrastructure that you can see in downtown. Some of these examples are small and you may never have noticed them. Over here in Kennedy Park near 100 Shenango Street there's a small plaza, but these paving stones are special. Instead of funneling stormwater directly to the storm sewer system, these are permeable pavers that allow the water to soak down to the subsoil. That slows down the surge of stormwater and it filters the water before it reaches the nearby Shenango River. If you're looking for a place to pour one out for your homies, this is it. Here's a street tree by 2 Court Street, but it's not like the other plantings you see around downtown. This one is notched on one side to capture runoff from the sidewalk and retain it for the benefit of the tree. But the building at 2 Court Street hosts a much larger green infrastructure project. The owners installed a green roof which cut glare from the sun into the adjacent offices, reduced heat loss in the winter, cooled the building interior in the summer, and slowed and filtered stormwater before it reaches the river. An even bigger green infrastructure project is starting soon at Governmental Plaza on Hawley Street. Built during the urban renewal period, the plaza was once a point of civic pride with fountains, internationally recognized works of art, and a large pedestrian plaza that hosted orchestral concerts. But sadly, it has been allowed to deteriorate. Many of its original amenities have been removed or no longer function. I spoke with the person behind this ambitious plan to bring the plaza back through green infrastructure. That's Beth Lucas, the new Director of Planning for Broome County.
The Government Plaza project is a project to implement green infrastructure practices at a county facility that houses both the county office building, city hall, and the state office building that was built in the 70s, but because it was built so long ago, really didn't integrate a lot of the sustainability practices we see today. This is really a personal passion project of mine. I work at the Broome County office building, so whenever I go outside on my lunch break, before or after work, it really is pretty depressing the way that the plaza currently looks. And so it doesn't really make you want to spend your free time out there. So I think that having a great public space like this downtown will be great for anybody that works downtown. It'll kind of, it'll create a lot of community character, and it'll be a real asset to the community as a whole, where you could do public events, or you could, just relax and spend some time. The budget is nearly $2 million for this project, and we received that money from a variety of sources. The main source of funding comes from a state grant from the Environmental Facilities Corporation. They fund projects to do green infrastructure at new or existing properties. There's a small portion of the grant, about $200,000, that came from a Greater Binghamton Fund grant to fund improvements in our local downtowns. And then there's small portions that came from local funding sources.
The final project will have green roofs, stormwater planters, and cisterns to hold stormwater for reuse. Aesthetic improvements include opening up the front wall for pedestrians, creating an outdoor cafe space, and constructing a small stage for public events. My last question to Beth was, how did you overcome opposition to this project?
So I guess the real key is to not just try to do a project just for the sake of doing a project. And you don't really, doing a sustainability project just because it integrates sustainability principles, isn't going to get you too far. You really need to identify what are the needs in your community, what are the projects that you need to do anyway, where maybe you could integrate sustainability into those. And really, that's how you're going to be able to gain support from your elected officials and other staff people that need to help you along the way.
By some criteria, downtown Binghamton is a food desert, a place where it is difficult to buy fresh, healthy food. This adds to many residents facing food insecurity, meaning they don't have reliable access to healthy foods. And the foods that you buy in a supermarket in this area travel on average 1,500 miles to reach your plate. That produces harmful greenhouse gases when it is possible to grow a lot of our food locally. Vines is a non-profit organization in Binghamton that is working on all of these issues. I spoke with the Vines Executive Director, Amelia LaDolce, at their urban farm on Tudor Street in downtown.
In our community we have a higher than New York State average food insecurity rate. We have a high poverty rate. So there's a lot of folks that can't afford fresh produce. And then, and that trickles down into all kinds of problems in our community, including increased healthcare costs and higher rates of diabetes and heart disease amongst lower income people who can't afford to eat well to prevent those diseases. Vine's mission is to create a sustainable and just food system, and we do that through building community gardens and other urban agriculture projects and helping get food to people in the city of Binghamton and surrounding communities. Really, we just want to find different ways to help people get access to healthy food and to be a part of the process of growing that food, getting that food out to the community. So everything we do is based in community engagement. So we have volunteers from neighborhoods helping us run every single program. And that's very important to us because we don't want to just be operating on a top-down basis. We really want to be operating on a bottom-up kind of basis. We started in 2007 as an all-volunteer organization. So we started with building community gardens on vacant lots that were really doing nothing for the neighborhoods, had no plans for them. So we started transforming those into gardens, and over time we grew into a nonprofit that has staff that we're now serving about 2,500 people a year. We have 18 community gardens, 11 different farm share distribution sites around the county, 2 acres of urban farmland. We've got a lot going on at this point. We have a lot of volunteer opportunities. We have it on our website. We even have our volunteer calendar on the website. So there's so many different ways you can come out and volunteer with us. So we have opportunities to volunteer here at our urban farm, where you can learn about food production and help with harvest or help with weeding. But also we'll have work days where we might build, like this fall, we're going to build a pergola. So if you have a little bit of woodworking skills, you can put that to use. We'll be building, hopefully, a new garden this fall, and that's a great project where if you have no experience with power tools but you want to learn a little bit, you can learn how to use a drill and help move soil and build garden beds for people to grow food in next year. But then just, even everyone can support us by spreading the word, coming to our workshops, participating in our programs. I think what I'm most proud of is just the fact that, when we started, people were even questioning whether or not community gardens would work here in Binghamton. And in 13 years, we've created something so phenomenal that it really puts, it really shows people that have those questions how much can happen here in Binghamton, and how, if we just dare to try, we might actually come up with something pretty amazing.
New urbanism is a set of design principles that includes walkability, mixed uses, mixed housing types, increased density, sustainability, and quality architecture in urban design. One design problem that architects and planners face is, how can we fit cars into the urban fabric without completely warping cities to suit the automobile? A good example of quality urban design is the parking ramp and office building that was built next to the historic Security Mutual building on Court Street in downtown. Here, the architects screened the parking lot from pedestrians and used similar building materials as the historic building. The windows on the upper floors of the new building align with those in Security Mutual and have the same rhythm for their placement. The University Downtown Center exemplifies more elements of new urbanist design and smart growth principles. The UDC has a brick and stone exterior similar to the historic buildings at the other end of Washington Street. It was built up to the front lot line to establish a street wall, and the parking for the UDC is to the rear and is screened by this brick knee wall. We see these same design ideas next door at Twin Rivers Commons. There are even more planning ideas on display at the UDC. In 1961, the main campus of Binghamton University was built in the suburbs, with little connection to the community. The construction of the UDC in 2007 marked a major reinvestment in the urban core. The result was that dozens of student housing projects followed, and this brought a new vitality to downtown. This makes the UDC a successful example of smart growth and infill development. But before the building of the UDC could begin, an environmental review had to be performed in accordance with the State Environmental Quality Review Act. Because the site had a long history as a Native American and early European settlement, an archaeological dig was performed as part of this review. The Public Archaeology Facility, a division of the university, found hearths and pits from a Native American occupation dating to nearly 5,000 years ago, and the more recent Longhouse occupation dating to 1000 to 1400 AD. Evidence was also found of 19th century Euro-American occupants of the site who were among Binghamton's early elite. All of these artifacts were cataloged and removed for archiving. A more challenging aspect of the site's history was the presence of a manufactured gas plant on the property in the mid to late 1800s, which supplied natural gas for streetlights to the surrounding neighborhood. The plant's operation left behind contaminated soil that had to be removed before construction could start. The UDC was designed with a vapor barrier below the foundation and a soil vapor extraction system to keep the interior free of contamination. This makes the UDC a prime example of brownfield redevelopment. Holt Architects designed the UDC to be LEED certified at the silver level. To achieve this, they used recycled materials, located the building on a public transit line, incorporated water-efficient landscaping, made the building very energy efficient, and incorporated low-emission building materials. All of this quality architecture and new urbanist design work supports an important smart growth principle. We need to foster distinctive, attractive communities with a strong sense of place. You can find lots of examples of placemaking in downtown Binghamton. The Columbian Exposition of 1893 kicked off one of the first big ideas in planning, The City Beautiful movement sought to make struggling cities work better by creating grand civic spaces. This built on the earlier municipal art movement, which tried to turn distressed areas into positive spaces by replacing blighted buildings with civic monuments and statues. Placemaking remains an important component of urban design today. As you walk around Binghamton, it is easy to find statues and other forms of public art that have been put up over the last 100 years. From the skirmisher near Confluence Park, which commemorates the Spanish-American War, to the Seven Seals of Silence by Binghamton University professor Ed Wilson, which remembers the assassination of President Kennedy, public art is everywhere. Groups and individuals are hard at work creating and installing new art pieces in Binghamton every year. The Broome County Council on the Arts has secured internationally known artists for local murals. The grassroots Department of Public Art has held mural fests and created murals on abandoned buildings. Ceramics artist Emily Jablon works with local teens to create mosaics in public spaces.
I got started in doing public art because my mom has a tile and backsplash factory, and she had this habit of firing me over the summers. So, I still wanted to keep working, and one thing kind of just led to the other, and it turned into summers filled with public art. So sometimes my projects get funded, sometimes my projects don't get funded. Right now, for the summer programs, it's about every other summer they get funded. But like I said, I'm in a really good situation where I can use my mom's scraps, and I've been doing this for over a decade, so I've built a lot of relationships with the local, construction companies who will, help me out with products and materials. So I apply for grants, and I harass politicians. No, but I think my projects, they give Binghamton a facet of uniqueness that is something that you can only really, it's a quality you can only get through the arts and through the culture. Whether it's, live music downtown or community mosaics such as this, these are the things that when prospective students or prospective people looking for jobs, or people looking to where they can raise a family. These are the things that they're going to notice about Binghamton that make Binghamton stand out, that they will remember, which make Binghamton unique. And that's something I'm really proud of.
Public art makes the city more vibrant. It improves residents' perception of the area, and art increases their attachment to community. Broome County recognized the importance of public art by making it part of their comprehensive plan. The county then used this plan to secure a major grant to create murals, mosaics, and art parks in Binghamton, Endicott, and Johnson City. So look for new works of art to pop up in the area. Most projects in planning cost millions to complete and take years to come to fruition. Tactical urbanism is a way of addressing a community's problems quickly and cheaply. Tactical urbanism actions are short-term, things that can be done in a weekend, and they can be done cheaply. But these quick measures are meant to inspire long-term change in a community. Sometimes tactical urbanism initiatives are officially sanctioned by the government with all necessary permits and approvals in place. They might even be carried out by city workers. For example, if we want to see if a small park would work in an area, let's roll out some AstroTurf, put down some chairs, and see if people actually use this space before we spend a lot of money to tear up the asphalt. Other times, technical urbanism is carried out by community members or activists. These actions are underground, guerrilla, and unsanctioned. Tired of seeing weeds in the sidewalk? Spray paint them to call attention to the problem. As I made this film, I saw lots of small things that needed fixing in downtown. What would be some tactical urbanism techniques that could be used to inspire long-term fixes for these problems? Well, I hope that you enjoyed my movie and that you learned to see downtown Binghamton a little differently. Thank you for pretending to pay attention.